Good morning. Good morning. I am Lori Shepard. I am the executive director here at Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. And on behalf of myself, our staff, our board of directors, and our volunteers, we just want to welcome you here with us today. Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It is such an important day for all of us. Every year we gather on this day to take a moment to remember, to reflect, and to respond. On this, the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camps by Allied forces, we memorialize the more than 6 million lives that were lost. We reflect on their memories, and we commemorate their lives. And we honor those who, through unimaginable odds, survived. I can think of no better way to do that than the program that we have today. Last fall, when several of us in the community got a call from Arizona Public Media's Chief Operating Officer, Gene Robinson, about doing a collaboration around the new documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust, I don't believe any of us knew that it would lead us to being here today. But what was very clear from the beginning was that Gene was personally moved by meeting our local survivors, and that he was passionately motivated to help ensure that their stories were not lost. His work to shepherd this project has secured the memory and legacy of 18 of the local Southern Arizona Holocaust survivors. That is why it is such an honor for me to invite Gene Robinson up to tell us more about this program.
Good morning. Laura, you're far too generous, thank you. And again, thank you for inviting us here to take part in today's remembrance event. As Lori mentioned, it was back in September that I met her and Sharon Glassberg. And we were screening the Ken Burns film, and we had 2 events in the community, one here in town and one in Green Valley. And as part of the event, we had screened excerpts from the film, but also had a live panel discussion. Each panel had a Holocaust survivor. And as gripping as the content was in Ken Burns' remarkable film, for me and for, I'm sure, all in attendance, the most important thing was hearing the firsthand accounts of those who went through this atrocity. So at that moment, it was pretty clear that we needed to work as quickly as we could to capture as many of these precious and personal stories as we could. So I went back to the station, and I'm blessed to work with a number of very talented producers and journalists, many who could have handled this project, but I wanted the best person for the project. So I talked to a few people, and one name instantly popped to the fore, Laura Markowitz. So let me tell you about this brilliant human. So Laura's not on our full-time staff. She's a contributing producer at ACPM since 2009. She's worked on special projects for radio and TV, including the radio series Youth Crossing Gender Borders and Feeding Our Future. She's a National Magazine Award-winning feature writer who covered the mental health fields for more than a decade. She's also a book editor and writer. She recently co-authored an economic textbook called Voices on the Economy: How Open-Minded Exploration of Rival Perspectives Can Spark New Solutions to Urgent Economic Problems. That's a heck of a title. Laura has also served on the City of Tucson's Human Relations Commission and the city's Commission on LGBTQ issues. So when I called Laura about the project, really, and we had met before on other projects at ACPM, it was seconds. I heard her voice and her passion, yeah, right person for the task. This is so important, not just because of the history, but because of the now, right? You know, the same bigotry and divisiveness and rhetoric that fueled this ugly part of the world's history still exists today. So telling these stories is very important. And this is what we do at ACPM. It's the hallmark of public media. It's why I came to public media 7 years ago, because we can tell these stories that have an impact. And we can only do this because of the support of our members. So those of you who are supporting us, our membership, this is your work, really. Because of you, we can do this. Without you, we could not do this. This is quite an undertaking, so thank you for your support. I was talking to a friend of mine who, a few years older than me, about 20 years older than me, and I was telling him about the project. She said, oh, Gene, I just can't, I can't watch it. It's too close to home, it's too personal. I said, I get that, I respect that, but you know what, this is not for you, because you know it. This is for those who maybe have some level of denial, who aren't as aware, right? If we can, those folks need to see and hear and feel the impact of what happened here. If we can touch one heart, change one soul, and that carries forward, we've been a success. So without further delay, my pleasure to introduce an exceptional producer, but more importantly, a remarkable human, Laura Markowitz.
Wow. I'm shorter than you might have thought, given that introduction. Gee, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you also to Laurie Shepard. I just need to second what Laurie said, that we wouldn't be here right now without the amazing Gene Robinson, who championed this project. I mean, he really saw the need for it, and he saw the potential for it. When he called me in September and said, hey, do you want to do this? I thought, yeah, I want to do this. I'm surprised that there's so much energy and commitment for this. And he said, no, surprise. This is so vital. This is so important. And it's so important right now. So luckily, my schedule worked out. And he did say to me, got to get right on it. Time's a wasting. So that's what I did, almost like immediately started the project. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming. And thank you to everyone who is watching on the live stream. International Holocaust Remembrance Day. As Laurie was talking about the day and the meaning of it, I just had to think about the survivors who are here today and all Holocaust survivors in general. I think there's never a day that isn't a Remembrance Day of what happened. This is really a day for the rest of us to mark the moment. We go on and on with our lives, and we forget that this really horrific, impactful. I run out of adjectives, honestly. That this thing happened, and I think I completely agree with what Gene said, that it's valuable, important, consequential that we remember and we think about it, and we think about the implications for us right now. So just outside the Holocaust Center, and strategically placed so anyone walking down the sidewalk on Stone Avenue can see it, there's a quote. It's in metal, and it's by a Polish novelist named Gustawa Jareka. I hope I said it right. I'm looking to Severin, who speaks Polish. Jareka or Jareka. She wrote it in 1942 in the Warsaw Ghetto. She died soon after on the way to Treblinka. And this quote says the following: "The record must be hurled like a stone under history's wheel in order to stop it. The record must be hurled like a stone under history's wheel in order to stop it." And the urgency of her words resonate with me. It was last October when I first embarked on this project for Arizona Public Media. My mission was to record stories of Holocaust survivors living in southern Arizona. So I'm in the car. I'm on my way to Green Valley to interview Wanda Wolosky, and I turn on, of course, 89.1 FM, NPR, Arizona Public Media, and I hear that world-famous rap artist Kanye West has threatened to, quote, go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. And then an hour later, I'm sitting across from Wanda in her den, and I'm listening to her describe how she had to hide, actually run away at one point from a Polish neighbor who would have eagerly, gladly turned her in to collect the bounty from the Nazis. 2 weeks later, I'm in the car on my way to interview Simon Katz. And I turn on the radio, and I hear that demonstrators have hung a banner over a Los Angeles freeway. It says, "Honk if you know Kanye is right about the Jews." And they're giving passing cars the Nazi salute. And then I'm sitting across from Simon, and I'm listening to his voice break as he describes his mother and 7 siblings getting swallowed up by the crowd on the platform, the train platform at Auschwitz, never to be seen again. And then it's a few weeks later, and I'm in the car on my way to interview Severin Sperling. I turn on the radio, and I hear that former President Donald Trump just hosted a dinner the night before with neo-Nazi leaders who praise Adolf Hitler. And then I'm watching Severin as he tears up, describing being 3 years old, hidden in a hole in the ground by a Polish couple, and they put him under a rabbit hutch to confuse the Nazi patrols, which used dogs to sniff out Jews. And this lasted for years. He hid for years. So, I mean, we'd all prefer to believe that another Holocaust could never happen to Jews or anyone else. We'd all prefer to believe that we put that period behind us, but evidently we have not. And I think it's urgent that we rethink that assumption. The Anti-Defamation League reports that anti-Semitism is at the highest level they've seen in decades. They've been measuring it since before I was born. So producing the Children of the Holocaust project at this moment in our history is very relevant, sadly. It's not just a historical project, in other words. There's a current component that we really can't ignore. I'm so grateful to the 19 individuals who were willing to participate and who entrusted me and Arizona Public Media with their stories. And I just want to read you their names right now. Some of them are here with us today. Paula Bronstein, who's here, Teresa Delgov, sitting beside her, Sydney Finkel, 3rd row, Yulia Janina, Lisa Grabel, who I believe is on the live stream. Hi, Lisa. Willie Halpert, Wolfgang Hellpap, right here. Simon Katz, also on the live stream. Hi, Simon. Ida Kvartovskaya, Bertie Lefkowitz, Paul Lichter, also on the live stream. Hi, Paul. Adelia or Alla Plotnikova, Andrew Schott, 2nd row. Severin Sperling, 1st row. Chris Tons, in our 2nd row. Marie Turim, 2nd row. Robert Varadi, Wanda Wolosky, and Valentina Yakorovskaya. So these are the individuals who grace us with their stories. I just want to also give a little shout out, or big shout out, to our videographer for this project, Martin Rubio. He came out of retirement to shoot 17 of the interviews with me. And he's not only, I like to call him a poet with light, but he listens with the most compassionate heart. And I know he's on the live stream too. Martin, thank you so much. And I know the survivors really enjoyed you as well. So, before I sat down to do the very first interview, I did my research. I discovered that there have been 3 waves of survivor testimony collection. The first occurred directly after the war. Concentration camp survivors were invited to write about their experiences. And then the second wave took place in 1961 and directly after. That was when there was a highly publicized and televised trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the main architects of Hitler's so-called final solution. And then the third wave happened in the early 1990s after Steven Spielberg's film Schindler's List came out. Spielberg then created the Shoah Foundation. Shoah is the Hebrew word for Holocaust, at the University of Southern California. It now houses something like 50,000 survivor testimonies. And some of our survivors have also given their testimony to the Shoah Project. I know Andrew for sure, and I believe Sydney as well. But here's the thing, and that's wonderful, and not to knock it at all. It's really important work, but if you try to watch those, it's difficult. They want you to go to USC and watch it at their facility. So this is really directly, for whatever their reasons. But for Arizona Public Media, our idea was that the survivor interviews would be widely available, widely accessible. I think this is so important. Rather than seeing them as sort of just a tool, rather than seeing them as a valuable tool for research, these are living first-person eyewitness accounts of something that is relevant and of interest to teachers, students, the general public. So now that the interviews are completed, and we actually have 19, the 19th was an audio only. She did not want to be on video, which is fine, but we still got the story. Now that the interviews are done, I can tell you what the Children of the Holocaust collection looks like. Okay, first of all the survivors I spoke with, and really nearly all the survivors who remain with us today, were very young during World War II. And they were, for the most part, children, hence our name, Children of the Holocaust. So the oldest survivors that I interviewed were born in 1930, and it was Yulia Janina and Simon Katz. And the youngsters were born in 1944. They're here with us today, Chris Tanz and Teresa Dolgov. The survivor stories can be grouped into several categories. So there are those who survived the horrible conditions. I mean, horrible is not even a big enough word. But the conditions of the concentration camps and forced labor camps. There are those who passed as Gentiles and hid in plain sight with a parent or in a boarding school or in a convent. Some of the survivors were what's known as hidden children. They were taken in by sympathetic Gentiles and raised in those families as a niece or a child. And some of them didn't even know they were Jews until, after the war. There were also survivors, like Severin, who literally hid, either alone or with family member. They hid in fields, as Andrew did, barns, cellars, wells, and burned out buildings. There were survivors who managed to flee to the West with their families, giving up everything, usually only with the clothes on their backs. And there were survivors who fled east into the Soviet Union toward Siberia. And many of them got stuck behind the Iron Curtain after the war. And because the Soviet government denied the Holocaust, they actually had no idea they were Holocaust survivors until after the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s. Some of the participants are also not only survivors, they're also children of survivors. In other words, their parents also survived. And so that means it's complicated. It means they not only carry their own story and history of survival, but they also carry their parents' stories of survival. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the collection and the range and diversity scope, of what Arizona Public Media now has to offer the community. It's quite rich. The question I know everybody is wondering, especially our people in the front row here, is, hey, when are these full-length interviews going to be available? I want to watch. So they're still in production, and by production, we're just lightly cleaning them up and putting them in order and putting a few markers in there. And I would say, in the coming weeks, please check back at azpm.org, and and we'll be letting you know when those become available. But in the meantime, we have been very busy. The whole team, which is a big team, wonderful, wonderful people of Arizona Public Media, have been working with me to create stories using excerpts from the interviews. And these have been airing on PBS 6 and NPR 89.1. So Ida Kvartovskaya's story aired last week on Arizona Spotlight on NPR. She's a survivor from Belarus, and at age 2, she escaped with her family when the Nazis invaded her city of Mogilev. So you can hear this piece right now on azpm.org if you just go to the Arizona Spotlight page. And a second Arizona Spotlight story will be airing on Thursday, and it's going to feature Paul Lichter. He and his family had a very harrowing escape from their town in Ripon, Poland, when the German army invaded. And he also went east towards Siberia. Really intense story. So in addition, we have 3 excerpts from survivor interviews that aired this month on PBS 6 in conjunction with the re-airing of the Ken Burns documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust. So we aired one of our stories before each of the Burns episodes. And we're going to screen those just for you today. But before then, we also have created a behind-the-scenes look at the Children of the Holocaust Project, and that aired this week on Arizona Illustrated, PBS 6. I just have to say, it was a first for me to be on the other side of the camera, and it gave me a much better appreciation of the courage it takes to allow yourself to be filmed for TV. So, you know, kudos to the survivors who put up with it. So let's take a look at this behind-the-scenes story. My name is Laura Markowitz. I've been a contributing producer for Arizona Public Media for about 13 years. The Children of the Holocaust Stories of Survival project was inspired by the Ken Burns documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust, and that first aired in September. Arizona Public Media sponsored 2 live public events in which Holocaust survivors were invited to speak. And that kind of got the ball rolling. So when this opportunity came up, I was extremely, interested, because I also feel like in our society right now, there's a resurgence of a lot of ideas that were popular when Hitler came to power. So, the old saying that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
I just hope that if children are going to listen to this or watch this, that they would think about how life can change on a drop of a pin.
Not a lot of people in Tucson know about what Holocaust mean.
You don't have a country if you don't have history, and if you don't teach history. And it seems that this is what is happening over here today.
Isn't that incredible?
That's an incredible picture. My task was to reach out to Jewish Family and Children's Services. They're a local nonprofit agency here in Tucson. I went to their support group, introduced myself and introduced the project, and asked if anybody wanted to tell their stories and be recorded for Arizona Public Media. Every hand in the room went up.
I think it's important for people everywhere to know about that extreme genocide.
What we're interested in is recording the details, the memories. What did it feel like when bombs were falling and you were not allowed to go into a bomb shelter because you were a Jew and you were hiding in an attic? What did it feel like to starve? What did it feel like to watch your mother walk away, and never see her again? The reason we want that isn't prurient interest. It's because that's what touches us. Then we can really understand the impact of something as horrific as an attempted genocide.
And we should convey that message to the young people, that they remember what happened in the Holocaust, so they know what happens there in that period, that this was never, even in the old times and they never did that kind of a massacre, for a specific race to be wiped out.
That was really unbelievable. This is
Many things. It's so many things. I can write a book about these details, but this is no way to explain.
So what we do is we really focus on what was their family life like before the war, and then the war starts. We really talk about their experiences, and then liberation. That's kind of the scope.
The first time my daughter heard my story is when I went to Fort Huachuca and I was talking to the soldiers over there.
I didn't tell this to anybody, and to my children, to anybody. I didn't want anybody to know.
I tell nobody. I didn't, because people sometimes don't believe that. People don't believe what we went through, but you can't tell. He's not going to believe you.
One of the first groups I was addressing, and all of a sudden I realized in the back, way in the back, was my grandson. He had never heard about this before, and neither had his dad. You know, nobody knew about it. I kept it complete to myself.
We have to ask ourselves, like, who do we want to be? In this story, when you hear these stories, like, who would you want to be? And I think that's the desired impact from my perspective. I would like people, just as I have been thinking about, who would I be? You know, and I think this is the great, ethical question, moral question that we humans in every generation have to ask ourselves. And what kind of world do we want to live in? What do we mean to one another? I personally believe we're all connected. And, racism is our biggest tragedy. Thank you so much. Oops, can we hear? Thank you so much, and I just want to give a thanks to the producer, Özlem Özgar, and our videographer, Robert Lindberg, for that story, and also thanks to Andrew Brown, AZPM's talented executive producer. I think just as I was watching that, I just need to thank our survivors again for your courage. Thank you for inviting Martine and I into your living room, and thank you for honoring us with your stories. I don't think that can be said enough. And also, one more little thanks. I'm just going to stick it right here, but Jewish Family and Children's Services has been just an amazing partner, and we have Raisa Moroz and Sharon Glassberg and Irina over here, who really support the survivors and supported Arizona Public Media, giving us, an introduction, vouching for us before they could get to know me. And it's wonderful. We're very lucky in our community to have Jewish Family and Children's Services of Southern Arizona. Well, as you just heard, our Children of the Holocaust project was inspired by the Ken Burns documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust. So I probably don't even need to tell you, but Burns is the most famous, I would say, living documentarian in the country, documentary filmmaker. And his many, many award-winning series have been airing on PBS since the 1990s. A few months ago, I was fortunate enough to be on a Zoom talk with him, and he was discussing the U.S. and the Holocaust. And he said something that totally surprised me, to quote, "I will not work on a more important project than this one. I will not work on a more important project than this one." Ken Burns is not Jewish. He didn't lose any family members in the Holocaust. Yet he believes the Holocaust is that important, not just in the lives of the Jewish people, but for all human beings. And I think this is what Jean was saying earlier. To paraphrase Burns, because he used some big words that are hard to pronounce, but what my paraphrase is, the Holocaust showed us how low we can go. And I kept thinking about this idea that the Holocaust showed us how low we could go. And then it occurred to me that 84 years ago, when World War II began, it was the first time we had the nimble technology to show people war. It was the first time, I believe, that human beings could witness it without being on the front lines themselves. So thanks to film, people around the world could watch the bombs drop out of airplanes. They could watch the goose-stepping Nazis march through Berlin. They could watch the stick-thin concentration camp survivors being carried out in the arms of their liberators. And these images make an impact on our collective imaginations. We see how low we can go. It's hard to look. And that's, again, Jean's older friends are like, Jean, I don't want to see. Well, honestly, I think I was like that. I think many people are. It's hard to look. But Ken Burns is saying, and I'm agreeing, that we need to look, because by bearing witness, aren't we hurling the record like a stone under history's wheel? So we use some of that historical footage from World War II to illustrate the 3 excerpts that aired on PBS 6 this month. And Arizona Public Media editor Emmanuel Joubeau did a meticulous job locating accurate and compelling images for each story. And hopefully it's just enough to give you the feeling and the flavor of what it was like for the survivors without distracting from their narrative. You'll also see photos and other artifacts in these pieces. People were extremely generous. As you saw in this, Marie and I sat down with her photo albums and my scanner, and I was able to scan hundreds, maybe 1,000 photos and documents related to the survivors' stories. Of course, some of them didn't have anything because everything was lost during the Holocaust. So, but those who had, we were able to capture for Arizona Public Media. And all of these things will be available to you with detailed captions, and it'll all be up on the Children of the Holocaust webpage at azpm.org in the coming weeks. So, somehow I've lost a page of my script. Bear with me. Got it. So, okay, and I could have winged it anyway, but since I took the time to write it. So the first excerpt we're going to watch is the story of Wolfgang Hellpap. He was born in Berlin and was there when Hitler rose to power. So he was there at the beginning. I mean, he saw it firsthand. And as you watch his remarkable story, you'll be seeing this lovely 91-year-old man. But please keep in mind that he was a very young child. When he went through these experiences, he was 6 years old. When the war ended, he was 12. So imagine yourself at that age and try to put yourself in Wolfgang's shoes. So let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Tom McNamara, host of Arizona Illustrated. From 1941 to 1945, Germany's Nazi regime murdered 2/3 of the Jewish population in Europe. Of the 6 million Jewish people who were lost in the genocide, about 1.5 million were children. Now, against all odds, some children managed to survive, and some of those survivors ultimately made their way here to southern Arizona. Their photos as adults now hang on the wall here at the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. Some endured years of deprivation, starvation, and abuse in concentration camps. Some managed to hide or pass for Gentiles, or found people who helped them. Others fled with their families, becoming refugees with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Over the past few months, Arizona Public Media has collected the harrowing true life accounts from 18 of Southern Arizona's child Holocaust survivors. Their experiences describe the brutality they witnessed and the acts of kindness that saved their lives. Here is one of those stories.
Tucson resident Wolfgang Hellpap was born in 1931.
I was born in Berlin, Germany, to a Jewish father, a Christian mother. My father was a very strict Jew. He had me registered in a Jewish community center in Berlin, and he also had my birth, so he wanted to really have me to be Jewish. I mostly lived with my mother, though, because my father had another family, see? So he just came a lot of times to visit us. It was not 1933, and the Nuremberg laws in Germany started to come out. People started getting all worked up about it, the Hitler started, and the Hitler Youth, where they had these shiny little uniforms, So as I was growing up, I was looking at that and I figured, maybe why can't I get into one of those uniforms, They look so brilliant, with medals and stuff. So, you're 4 or 5 years old. You really don't know here or there, but since that was now the theme in Berlin especially, all the flags and banners and, Hitler's speeches and the brown shirts marching around, just the impressions were just too great sometimes, So I didn't really realize yet what's going on, All that was just the parades and stuff was great for me, 5 years old. So anyway, at 6 years old, my mother put me in a school, elementary. No, she was not aware either that Jews cannot even go to schools, but the Nuremberg laws were not that enforced yet, They were there, but it's not that strict yet. But anyway, so I attended first class, got into second class, then came the hammer, the teacher one day had a list, and was sitting there, and she says, according to our laws, our leaders, Adolf Hitler and our superiority, all Jews have to be removed from school right now. And we have one Jew here. And she called my name, And of course I was crying. And the other kids would start yelling and screaming at me, dirty Jew. And it was just horrible at that experience, I was 6, 7 years old. And feeling it, so that was the first encounter that I had with that kind of regime, that took over in Germany. So I got just to leave the school right now. So I ran out crying, and some kids came after me and trying some stones and stuck, spitting. And now with some of these kids were in the Hitler Youth, so I was running from them, really. So now I knew. I got to my mother's and started crying and telling her, what happened to me in school. At that time, too, the Gestapo told her that I have to wear the Star of David on the outer garments, If I don't wear that, they really take me away immediately, So I had that star on my garment all the time. At that time, we couldn't even keep the apartment. The landlord told us we have to move. So we finally found another place, but that was a lady with her sister that has an apartment, and she says we can have one room in her apartment.
The Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht, was orchestrated by the Nazi militia called the Brown Shirts. 7-year-old Wolfgang watched from his apartment window as mobs destroyed Jewish homes, synagogues, and businesses. They dragged Jews onto the streets and beat them.
The hooligans, all the looters and stuff, they're roaming to the streets and carrying those flags and, brown shirts. They pushing people, and the common people were, all screaming in the streets, the Heil Hitler, and stones were thrown around and glass was shattering in Jewish stores. I was so scared. I knew by now that they were persecuting me too.
Wolfgang's father was named Max Herschel. On Kristallnacht, his business was completely destroyed. Then the German police insisted that Jews had to pay to clean up the damage. So he decided to leave Germany. China was one of the few countries that welcomed Jews. He and his wife and their children fled to Shanghai.
I never saw my father again, no. 1941, the Gestapo came to all of a sudden. They cleaned up everywhere. Jews were now deported. German Jews were all deported, put into cattle cars and gone away. So my name came up with them too, So they came to the house and they told my mother, they said, we're taking him, but we're not taking him to a camp. He's going to go into an orphanage. In 1942, 43, the Nazis started deporting our kids too. So what they did, they came in the middle of the night. They usually came, and they had the list, of the kids that they're gonna take. 9, 10 years old. I was shivering in my bed, thinking, I hope they don't call my name. One of my tasks was in the orphanage sometimes babysitting on these little kids, because I was a little bigger already. Then I had some babies that I liked very much already. In 1943, one day the Nazis decided they're going to dissolve the whole orphanage, So SS came in. And so when they came, they started crying and screaming and so they took a machine gun and started to shoot. They just killed them right there. And the rest of us, they took us into trucks, And there was a big assembly point in Berlin. There was hundreds of people, maybe even 1,000 people were already there waiting for deportation. The vehicles, the trains, they were already ready there to push them in and take them to camps, And here I was with 2 other guys, who we survived, and I'm looking, and the other guy says too, he's looking, there's a little wall there, not too high, You think we can get over that? And the other guy, I don't know, but the SS is looking everywhere. I said, well, what can I say? Let's try. And we ran through that wall, got over it, and we're gone, But at the time, I start looking back, I saw one SS soldier, he saw us. He didn't shoot. He did not shoot. So we got over that wall and back in the streets, And of course, I couldn't run to my mother's place because I knew if I ran there, that's where they're going to look first, So I knew one uncle, he had a little spread outside of Berlin. I took off and it was a long way to go there, I couldn't take any transportation or anything, in the meantime, I also kept my star on here, because I figured if a policeman see, maybe I'd be in bigger trouble, like that. So I finally made it to my uncle, but he had 2 girls. One girl was already 14, 15 years old, and she was also in the Hitler Youth, my uncle was very strict. He was against that Nazi regime in the end. So he told them, "You're not going to tell anybody that you have your cousin over here now, you know." And he told me he had a little water hole there in the backyard. He says, "You're going to hide in there during the daytime, especially because the neighbors, otherwise they're going to be thinking, what is that kid running around in daytime, not in school?" Allies started to bomb Berlin, and I couldn't even go anywhere else in a shelter or anything like that, you know, because with my star on as Jew. One day, bomb fell not far from that. I mean, it was really scary, you know. And so my uncle, he says, "You know, it's better you can't stay no more, you know. It's too dangerous for you to stay."
He left his uncle's house and went to hide with friends of the family, but they could only keep him for a few months.
Well, I didn't have any place more to go. So any time the bomb was high, I couldn't go in the shelters and stuff, so I was just hiding in places where they smashed from the bombings, you know. So I was hiding there like being homeless, you know. But of course, my mother was always trying to keep track of me, and she bought me food and things like that, you know. And she says, "No matter what now, Berlin is bombed. You come to my place now, and you stay with me." Keller with the other people. And then we saw a Russian tank came down the street. Slowly coming, you know. So they told me, "Go out there, go out there." So I did. I ran out the cell. I went there, and it was a Russian lieutenant or something. And he saw my star, so he kept screaming, "Hitler's dead, Hitler taught, Hitler dead." And he embraced me, and that was my liberation there.
It was very emotional, and I can't imagine what it's like for Wolfgang, you know, to watch this. There's so much more to his story, which you'll be able to hear when the full interviews are available at azpm.org. I'll just give you a tiny preview. Wolfgang goes back to Berlin in 2016 and visits the site of the orphanage. It had been destroyed by an Allied bomb, but there's a new building there now, and there's also a memorial for the children of the orphanage. And so Wolfgang tells me all the names of those little kids that they killed, all the names are on the wall. And the people who live there in the new building, they have to pass that wall all the time. Shows them that that's where these kids got murdered. I still get tears sometimes thinking about what happened. And Wolfgang also, in his interview, describes more of what happened to him after the war. At one point, he immigrates to the United States in the 50s, and he's immediately drafted into the US Army, and guess where they send him? Back to Germany to serve in a tank division, where he promptly backs a tank up into another tank, so that's the end of his career as a tank driver. And what else happens? He's like the bad boy of his unit. He's constantly getting hauled in by the military police for starting bar fights with Germans. In his words, "I figured anyone over 30 had to have been part of what happened, and I was mad." So, Wolfgang, I just thank you so much. You're remarkable, and your story is just so moving. Thank you very much. So the next story we're going to watch is brief. And the only reason for the brevity is that these were these fill spaces. The Ken Burns episodes were of different lengths, and so, TV goes on the half hour. So to fill the space, we thought, oh, this is a perfect thing. So it's the only reason Wanda's is short. Her story is just remarkable. But we were able to find a piece of it that fit perfectly in the time. So Wanda Wolosky has told her story to thousands of people, at least, in southern Arizona. And she also wrote an autobiography, and it's called After All, Life Can Be Beautiful. That tells you a lot about, her spirit. So one of the things that stands out for me about Wanda's story, and this part we're going to show you, is that her life was saved more than once by Polish Gentiles. They risked their own safety to help her and her mother survive. And I think that reminds us that no matter what situation or circumstance we find ourselves in, we always have a choice about who we're going to be. So let's take a look.
The first thing what they decided to do, you're starving, we're going to feed you. So they gave flour to the bakers, and they told them, bake the bread. But right away, they say, there'll be no food for the Jewish people. And some of the Jewish people, they dress differently, they look differently. If a person like that would stay in line, he would get pulled, beaten up, and say there's no food for you. My mother was staying in line, holding me in her arms. When our turn came, the German that was watching the line gave me a loaf of bread and my mother a loaf of bread, which was unbelievable because nobody got 2 loaves of bread. So as we walk, at the end of the line was staying a woman that she was living in our building. And every time that she saw my mother, she would say, hey, look at that Jew woman. And that was not an exception. She said, look at the Jew woman. She has 2 loaves of bread. By the time it's going to be my turn, there'll be no bread left over. So my mother gave her a loaf of bread, knowing that I'm starving. And the woman was staying with her mouth open. She didn't know what to say. But sometimes a loaf of bread changes a person. So he took me, I slept in his house. They slaughtered a pig and the fat on the stomach, which is really bacony, with the skin, they wrap around my body. I mean, so tight that I felt like I am in a cocoon. We go to the gate. The German say, bitte Papieren. Looks the papers, alles in Ordnung, everything okay. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he say, are you cold, my child? And I was sweating with every pore in my body because if that hand would go a little bit lower, it wouldn't be my child, it would be bullet on the spot. We started walking the streets, sleep in basement, sleep under the steps. And one day, as we were walking, the woman that my mother gave the bread saw us. And you never knew who was your friend and who was your enemy, because they would tell you to come with them. You didn't have no choice, you needed to. They would take you to a police station, you got shot, they got paid. So she said, what you doing here? And my mother said, I'm really looking for a place to stay. So she said, okay, come with me. She used to have a building in a cemetery when she was taking orders for headstones. She took us over there to that building. Every morning she would come from her house with food. eat with us and share the food. But you see how a loaf of bread can change a person completely.
Well, Wanda displayed great strength as a young person, and when you hear the full interview, you realize all the things that this 9, 10, 11-year-old child survived. She was raped, she was starved, she was homeless, so many losses, so many other traumas. So in the interview, I asked her if she harbors any bad feelings toward Germans, and she says no. And if you know Wanda, she has a particular way of saying no. It's very final. And she gave me her no, and she said that, I've befriended many German people throughout my life, and I've shared my story with many German military personnel who visit Fort Huachuca. But what she can't tolerate, she says, are Nazis of any nationality. In her words, people are people. And that means that Jews during the Holocaust weren't inevitably heroic or selfless or even particularly kind to other Jews. And Poles, Germans, Hungarians, and others, they weren't automatically murderers or sadists. People made choices about who they wanted to be and how they acted. In many of the stories we collected, there are accounts of German soldiers who looked the other way. We just heard that in Wolfgang's story. The SS officer didn't shoot. There were neighbors and strangers who risked their own lives to help Jewish people. So for me, this raises the big question. Why are some people motivated to be altruistic while others feel perfectly justified being cruel and contemptuous of others? And I think it comes back to empathy. When we are able to put ourselves in another person's shoes, we can identify with them. We can see ourselves in the other. And suddenly they aren't some foreign-looking, scary-seeming stereotype and something that we've been taught to hate or fear. We can actually see a human being deserving of our respect. And to me, Wanda's story is such a gift because it demonstrates what happens when a person has empathy. It changes hearts and minds, and it allows us to experience our full humanity. So Wanda is just such a remarkable human being, and I'm just sad to report that she is not doing well, and she will be leaving us soon. So we're sending good thoughts to her right now and to her daughter Sharon and her son Jesse and her grandchildren, and also to all those who know and love her, and many of whom are in the room with us right now. So, as you heard in the behind-the-scenes video, many of the survivors did not want to tell their stories to anyone. I loved Andrew's realization that his grandson was in the back of the room when he told his story. Even their own families didn't know, which seems amazing. But Maya Angelou writes, "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Okay, so that's what we believe today. We believe now that talking about trauma is an important part of the healing process. That was not the conventional wisdom in the decades after the Holocaust. Survivors were just not encouraged to discuss what they went through. Sidney Sevek Finkel, who's here with us today and whose story we're going to hear next, even met with the famous psychoanalyst Anna Freud, and this was Sigmund Freud's daughter, famous in her own right as well. And the war had just ended. He was in England at this point. And this was her great advice to Sidney. Just forget about what happened to you. Just move on. And as you're going to see, Sidney went through a lot during the Holocaust. And I just can't imagine. And when you watch it, just think to yourself, wow, he didn't talk about it to anyone for maybe more than 45 years. It wasn't until he was about to become a grandfather his daughter Ruth called him and said, "Dad, I need to know. We're bringing another generation into the family. I need to know." He said, "Okay," and he sat down with her and his son Leon, and he told them. Before we watch our excerpt of his interview, I just want to share this advice, another piece of advice I gleaned about how to bear witness to Holocaust survivor testimonies. And I found it particularly helpful when I heard Sydney's story for the first time. It's from a scholar named Sidney Bolkowski. And he says, "Listen to survivors' testimonies as they are, unedited, horrific, and full of meaningless acts of violence and murder. We should take them in as they are, no matter how difficult it is to hear them." So with that in mind, let's take a look. Sidney Finkel was born Sebek Finkelstein in Lodz, Poland. When Germany invaded Poland, he was 7 years old.
My city was bombed, and we were down in the cellar, and this is the first time I knew what it was to feel real fear. And we went into this little village, and it was crowded. There was lots of people from my hometown there. Then all of a sudden I heard these airplane noises coming from the sky. And as I looked up, these planes came flying down, and they were so low that I swear I could reach out my hand and touch them. And they were shooting their machine guns. And I was frozen to the spot. I couldn't move. Then I felt my mother grab me by my shoulders, and she knocked me down to the ground. And then she did something really fantastic. She lay on top of me. She covered me completely with her body so as to protect me. And after a while, I stood up, and I saw a lot of people with limbs missing. They were burned. And I heard my name Sebek being called, and my father and I met each other, and we ran into a nearby forest.
The Nazis forced Jews into a ghetto. Sebek's whole family squeezed into one room. It was hard to find food.
Also, my sister, the one I loved so much, she was pregnant, and she was in a lovely Polish family came to us and said, "We're going to put her into a Catholic hospital and save her." And that's what we did. I later learned that somebody in the hospital informed the Germans that there was a Jew there pretending to be a Pole. They came in, and she had delivered a boy. They took him and they threw him out the window. And then they took her to the Piotrków cemetery and shot her.
Then the Nazis began deporting Jews from the ghetto to concentration camps.
So we watched the train come to a town south of us, and the Jews are emptied out and put onto these trains. And they say the U-turn is going to come. But they also tell us that about 1,500 of us would be able to stay behind. Now we were about 30,000 at that point. So everybody wanted to have the job, right? So I worked in a glass factory. The day came where the trains were there for us. So what you pray. I mean, but you know, that will always stay in my mind. It's not a prayer. People would fall on the floor and they would bang their head against the wall and they would cry out. And that's when I lost my faith in God. There was no help. There was no help.
On the train platform, Sevek's brother, Izzy, bribed a German guard. He, Sevek, and their father were allowed to stay behind to work in a factory. 2 of his sisters were also allowed to leave, but one of them, Franja, couldn't bear to be parted from their mother. The 2 boarded a cattle car together and died at Treblinka.
The war is almost over, and the German army is retreating through Russia and Poland. And we figured the war is going to come to an end, and we're going to be liberated in our hometown, so we can start it in our hometown. But they have different ideas. They take there's 2,000 of us left. And now, for the first time, I'm marched into a station where there's just a train with like cattle carts waiting for me. And I just don't want to go in, and they throw me in, and I'm separated from my father and my brother. And inside is, you can't sit, it's nothing to drink, and no washroom facilities.
He blocked out the memory of that 3-day journey to Buchenwald. Sevek shut down his emotions to survive the cold, starvation, and brutality. 4 months later, his father found him.
He was glad to see me, but I didn't feel any affection for him. I just felt like old people had no right to live. Didn't show any caring for him. He was on his way to a place underground that made missiles. That's the last time I saw him.
The war was almost over, and the Nazis wanted to kill as many Jews as possible before the prisoners were liberated.
We're told to go out on the march, and about 3,000 prisoners, including half of them Russian soldiers. The gates of Buchenwald opened up, and we were going, so it's a beautiful day, and we begin to march towards Weimar. That's the next big town where the railroad stations was. Anyway, in front of me was the father, Hungarian father and son. This was an 8-mile trip, and the father pushed himself away from the son, and he said, and fell into the ditch. And he said, and the son was shrieking for him to stand up. And there was the guard with the rifle, and we heard a shot, and that was the end. So we came to Weimar, beautiful town, and another train awaits us. See, a lot of the very next day that we left Buchenwald, the American army arrived. We went on a train ride of 3 or 4 weeks, open cars, and except for the first day when we had a loaf of bread, we had nothing. That's when we ate grass, and we saw people eat human flesh. And it was just, that was the worst part of my experience. The Germans were losing the war, of course, and They didn't know where to go because if they wanted to go one place, it was already too late. It was already occupied by the Allies. You see, so they just moved back and forth.
The train finally stopped at Theresienstadt concentration camp, where Sevek was liberated. He was very sick with typhus and had a long recovery. One day, lying in bed, he heard his name being called from the street.
So I run to the window, and lo and behold, there's my brother walking the street shouting my name, because he has heard that there was a kid from Buchenwald that had come. We never grieved. We never grieved, and we were told to forget about it.
And when I hear Sydney speak, I know just the enormity of those losses. And actually, I feel really the losses of all these child survivors, echoed in his voice. Yes? Wanda. Right. Sydney is saying it would be nice, is thinking about Wanda right now, and that her family who may be watching knows that we're all thinking about her right now as well. Thank you. Well, although Sydney did start telling his story later in life, he made up for lost time by writing a memoir, and it's called Sevek and the Holocaust, The Boy Who Refused to Die. I think now you understand that title. He's already distributed, I think, tens of thousands of copies to schools around the country. And Sydney, just congratulations on this important work, and it's such a powerful book, and I hope it gets distributed far and wide. Well, friends, I know this has been a lot to take in. When the full interviews are available on azpm.org, I really encourage you to take the time and watch them. Each survivor's story is really just profoundly touching and profoundly important. So those of us here and everyone who watches and hears the stories of survival on AZPM are really doing this important work of bearing witness. We are, together, hurling the record like a stone under history's wheel to stop it. And before we open up for questions, I want to read you the rest of that quote, because I think it's so good. It says, "One can lose all hopes except the one, that the suffering and destruction of this war will make sense when they're looked at from a distant historical perspective. From sufferings unparalleled in history, from bloody tears and bloody sweat, a chronicle of days of hell is being composed, which will help explain the historical reasons why people came to think as they did and why regimes arose that caused so much suffering." I thank you all for your attention, and we do have some time for questions. If you'd like, just raise your hand. They have a microphone they'll send around. Here comes Jason. While he's bringing the microphone, I just want to give a little shout out to our AZPM production team that's here today, led by Sean Teague with Greg Gutierrez, Zach Harns, and Jason Lee. You have a question?
My question would be about the publication. PBS is a station that not everybody watches. I have friends who say, no, we don't want to watch PBS. They watch other stations and think that's a lot better. So how is it possible to bring this to other stations, to other networks, CBN, ABC, etc.
Well, this really is an asset of a public media, but the nice thing, and I'd say the answer to your friends who, for some strange reason, don't like public media, is that these are all accessible for free at azpm.org. So they can be seen, around the world. They're actually hosted on YouTube, which means anybody who's searching a survivor interview on YouTube will actually be able to bring up Arizona Public Media's collection without even knowing Arizona Public Media.
That takes initiative of the person.
It does. I think, I can't really talk to whether Arizona Public Media would give these to other networks. We could put this suggestion in, and I thank you for it. Thank you. Did we have a question over here as well?
What was it like emotionally to do these interviews?
I mean, I felt extremely moved. So as a journalist, and I'm a feature journalist, meaning I've never been a news reporter. I've always done kind of long form, either magazine or radio, a little bit for TV as well. Kind of liking the depth of a story. So for me, emotionally, there was a couple levels. One, it was really satisfying to get a big picture story from someone and not interview toward a soundbite, let's say, or a short thing. But of course, I mean, the content is just, it just knocks your breath out. Martin Rubio, the videographer, once said to me afterward, he said, "Is there such a thing as secondhand trauma?" And I said, I think so. I mean, but we didn't hold back. We didn't hold ourselves back from it. We let ourselves feel, because I think that's the gift that the survivors give us. They're sharing what it was like, and we are receiving it. So it was profound. It was hard. Sometimes I had bad dreams. It's really a lot to take in. Hopefully, it's made me better able to hold anybody's story. It was like boot camp for that. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yeah. Oh, wait, I'm going to give you the microphone so that the people on our live stream can hear. Jason, we have one right over here. Or Fred, you can just say it and I'll repeat it.
I was wondering what the reaction was from the public. Showed a lot of stiffness from the Holocaust. So they said, about the Jews, we don't want to hear any more about it.
So he's wondering whether the public is saying, we've heard enough about the Holocaust and we don't want to hear any more about it. I think we have not heard that at all at Arizona Public Media. Not quite the opposite. I think people have been extremely moved by it. I think you're speaking to something that Jewish people have a sensitivity to, because sometimes there is an idea that there's a competition about suffering and how come the Jews are getting so much attention and what happened to the Jews and not, other people. And I would say Arizona Public Media is committed to telling everyone's story. That's the mission of public media. So, I think there's a great respect for giving some room and space, to tell Jewish stories. It doesn't take away from anybody else's story, in other words. Is there another question?
I just want to say that I feel when you came first on this project to us, I kind of was down was it. It's been done before. It's been done before. Spielberg did it. Rising started it again. But you should receive an Oscar for this.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Thank you. That's really high praise. This was from Sidney Finkel, and he said when I first proposed to do this, he was skeptical. He was like, "Oh, this has been done, another thing." But now he's saying he liked it. That's all I'll say there. Thank you very much. Honestly, that's the review that means the most to me. When you and Wanda and Wolfgang, gave me your reactions, that really Raisa and her mother for our Arizona Spotlight story. That to me, that means that you feel respected and that you feel that Arizona Public Media is doing the right thing with your trust. So thank you very much. I think we have to wrap up now. I'll be outside if anybody wants to chat with me after. I just can't thank you enough for making time on a Friday afternoon to sit and be with me and our survivors and our AZPM team. And for everyone live streaming this, really just thank you so much. So, thank you.